You're listening to the Pithy Chronicle. History with a bite. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we bring you history's dirtiest deeds, dripping with sarcasm.
Are you hungry yet? Hey there, Pithy listeners, and welcome back. This week, we are very excited to bring you another courtly tale from the Heian court of Japan, right around 1000 AD. And actually, today's story is a story about a story.
Okay. It's like a picture.
Story upon story upon story.
A picture within a picture.
Exactly.
Epic.
We are talking about the Tale of Genji. It is a staple of Japanese classical literature, and it spans the life, death, and then the descendants of one man, a fictional character named Genji. And the narrative focuses heavily on Genji's quite complicated love life, and excitingly, it gives us a very detailed look into the customs of the Heian period, which was an extremely isolationist, aristocratic court that became entirely preoccupied with courtly minutiae and completely lost touch with the realities of the everyday Japanese people. It is a very unique period of time, and reading the Tale of Genji, not only is it an interesting narrative, but it gives you this insider look at something that is otherwise so different from what we think of today.
And you know how I love an inside look at anything.
It feels very behind-the-scenes tour, basically.
Oh, yes.
Also, the Tale of Genji is considered to be one of the world's very first novels, if not the first novel. It depends on people's definitions, and it's hotly debated, and I'm not getting into that. It is also pretty much thought to be the first psychological novel. And, best yet, it was written by a woman, Murasaki Shikubu, for women.
Oh, I'm so here for that.
It is still lauded today as one of Japan's national treasures, and it is a quintessential representative of a very unique society by a writer who speaks of universal human concerns in what is considered a timeless voice. So she talks about emotions and feelings that you and I have today, but it's in the context of this very weird time in Japanese cultural history. One historian said, quote, "Japan has not seen another such genius."
I love that
Unquote.
It's a woman that brings out such a wonderful comment from historians.
Yes.
And going back to what you said about a timeless voice, when you talk about the human experience at its root, it is timeless. And that's really just an awesome thing that we get to experience over 1,000 years later.
Exactly. The Tale of Genji was written in installments. It was very Dickensian. Although, actually, Charles Dickens came about 800 years later.
So it was very Shikubian?
Murakashian.
Ah, that's right, Murakashian.
Yes, we'll give her the honorific. To give a modern comparison, Genji's tale is a bit like the Harry Potter series, where the entire court was waiting for the latest chapters.
I love that.
We even have 1,000-year-old diary entries from other noblewomen who are expressing their anxiety and anticipation to find out what happens next to the amorous Genji. I definitely was one of those Harry Potter people that was at the bookstore. Yes, there used to be bookstores. At the bookstore at midnight, waiting to get my copy of book 6, book 7, and then I would run home and read it all through the night so that I knew exactly what happened, who had died, who had lived, and all that jazz. So this is super similar, I think, in the way that it was anticipated and the way that it was celebrated by the court.
I wish I had that kind of experience.
Were you not into that?
No, I was in a community that very much thought that Harry Potter was satanic.
Oh.
So, no.
Okay, never mind.
We all watched the movies, which my mom was cautioned against.
Of course.
But I did, however, read the last Deathly Hallows because I had to know.
Yep. So the Heian court at the time reminds me also of the scandalously vapid world of Gossip Girl.
Oh, don't hate on Gossip Girl.
I'm not. I watched it, but it's a teenage drama TV series that we all pretended that we didn't watch. And like the elite of the Upper East Side, the Heian aristocracy lived in utter privilege, completely removed from the normal struggles of day-to-day life. They were isolated in their palace bubble with money and privilege flowing through them. And that left all these courtiers without purpose. To fill this void of nothing to do, no concerns, no monetary stresses, they turned to poetry, as one does. And they became incredibly preoccupied with this courtly life and all of these rules and restrictions, a lot like Versailles.
Great, so we get to watch each other.
No, that was not done. Thank goodness the Japanese had better sense than that.
Thank God.
No, but they were so bored and they had all this free time that they devoted themselves to the emotional arts, like poetry, which became the dominant endeavor of both men and women of the court. Anyone who was anyone was well-versed in classical Chinese and Japanese poetry, and they must be adept at writing poetry on the spot, even out loud, and weaving it into their daily conversations. So you would randomly say the first line of some famous poem, and it would give everybody the knowledge that you were referencing this age-old classic. It was a mark of status to be a good poet. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge poetry person. I can appreciate good poetry. I'm certainly not gonna break into a haiku at this moment, but I don't quote Tennyson on a daily basis.
I mean, I do. I'm so surprised you don't. Jokes aside, I love poetry. I like the structure of it. I like a lot about it, but I can't come up with it.
And they would write poems to each other. Instead of passing a note in class, they would write a poem. They would write poems to celebrate special days like the emperor's birthday or the start of a new year. They would write poems because they saw a pretty sunset that night. And they would have poetry competitions within the court. Poetry was
it.
Epic.
Yeah.
To be this epitome of refinement and elegance at court, you had to pepper your daily conversations with allusions to these classical poems. It would be as if I rewrote this episode to feature not 1, not 10, but maybe 100 allusions to famous literary works. And of course, I wouldn't talk about them. I would just say like 3 lines. And that would make you automatically reference the whole thing in your head, and you would fill in the silence. It was very la-di-da. It was very hoity-toity.
So I would say it was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea, and you would just know that there was a lady there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabelle Lee. Is that what you're telling me?
Kind of like that, yeah.
Okay.
But I think the poems were probably...
Nicer than Poe?
Nicer than Poe! Yeah. Well, they were Chinese and Japanese.
I wouldn't be able to read them.
Along with poetry, calligraphy was also vitally important. A person's handwriting was considered to be a reflection of their soul. So messy handwriting obviously meant a sinister character and bad breeding. Erica, how was your handwriting?
Actually, while we were here last time, I did a calligraphy class.
Oh, fun!
What's interesting is that you can't pick up the brush throughout the stroke. You have to make a stroke and then a stroke
when
and
writing
then a stroke.
A character.
Right, yeah. You can't pick up the brush or even go back and make it look nicer. So I made my first stroke, and everyone around were like, dramatic intake of breath. And I was like, oh my God, I have made some horrible...
For one stroke, you have offended people.
Yes, that's what I thought. And I said, is everything okay? I think they could tell that I was concerned.
And getting redder by the moment.
Exactly. And they were like, so bold. And I was... I mean, it's not...
You're like...
It's not wrong.
It's not wrong. You are a bold person. And I think that our culture just doesn't place the same emphasis on it. And so we would not think that the way that we would write would define our character. But bold fits you. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
The Heian period began after the 50th Japanese Emperor Kanmu, moved the capital to Heian-kyo, or modern-day Kyoto, in 794 AD. And the Heian period ended in 1185 with the rise of the samurai and warrior classes, leading to a feudalistic Japan. During this time, this special peaceful period in Heian literally means peace, a national peace. No more civil war or infighting among the nobility. Instead, they just cocooned themselves in the palace with their poetry, and basically they just stopped governing. And thus, the imperial...
When you're writing haikus all day, there's not much
else.
else.
Who has the time? The Imperial House of Japan lost most of its power during this time. The emperor became a figurehead, while the very dominant Fujiwara clan intermarried within the imperial family, meaning that future emperors were born from imperial fathers and Fujiwara mommies, keeping the powerful family firmly in place and at the center of everything. At this same time, China's Tang Dynasty was dealing with a lot of rebellion, and so it forced the Japanese to cut ties with China for the first time in quite a while and really look completely inward for inspiration. So this is a time of Japanese national culture. It blossoms during this Heian period, and it became noted, as I said, for these artistic endeavors, especially literature and poetry, and it is now considered to be the height of Japanese classic culture, even today.
Okay.
That is the period in which she is writing. But beyond the imperial grounds, the Japanese people as a whole were actually suffering. Barter and trade ruled the economy. Some historians I read claimed that the government literally forgot how to use and issue currency. So money just didn't mean what it used to, which is very depressing.
That's just...
You've got a stash of money and it no longer means anything.
Wild.
They just became so enthralled with their own poetic abilities. And then there was this shoin system, which allowed privileged families to own autonomous estates that were tax-free. Never great. That made these elite families super wealthy while devastating the general population.
Right, because there's nothing else going back to
support everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
These super elite were known as ryomen, or the good people.
Stop it.
Yes, and they were roughly about 5,000 people. This aristocracy consisted of about 5,000 people out of a total of a population of 5 million. Talk about the
1%. Yeah.
But thanks to works like the Tale of Genji,
Oh my.
as well as these incredible diary entries that we have, along with the daily poems being written by all of these 5,000 plus noblemen and women, we know a lot about the privileged few. Less so about the general populace. We know their beauty standards, for instance, and they were unique. Much like the European Renaissance, the Heian court believed that one's outward beauty, or lack thereof, defined their character. So not only did your calligraphy have to be great, but if you were ugly on the outside, they assumed you were ugly on the inside.
Isn't this also, though, when they were dyeing their teeth black?
Yes! That's right. So both men and women powdered their faces white and dyed their teeth black.
Tell me more about that process, because black teeth would not scream to me beautiful, and therefore I'm really healthy on the inside. That
no, it doesn't feel healthy.
Not...
I would agree. It feels quite dirty. This was actually a fashion that lasted, beginning in the 10th century and not really falling out of favor until the early 19th century. That's 900 years, people.
What?
And it really only fell out of fashion when Western or European influences began to affect Japanese style. These blackened teeth, or ohaguro, were considered beautiful because they were reminiscent of that deep black color of polished lacquer.
But what did they use for that?
Okay, that's a good question.
How and why?
How and why?
Because if it's the lacquer, that's not safe.
They did not put the lacquer on their teeth.
Good.
It was actually a solution of iron fillings and vinegar, and it was used daily, sometimes up to 3 to 4 times a day, because it didn't last. It would fade.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually acted like a modern-day dental sealant, so it did help with preventing tooth decay.
Wow.
Maybe that's why it started, probably not. It wasn't just a Japanese thing. There were many Southeastern Chinese and Asian societies that blackened their teeth at the time for cosmetic beauty. Maybe because it was a way to differentiate the human from the demons that were depicted in art with these large white fangs. So they were distancing themselves from the demonic.
That's so fascinating, because my instinct initially was, oh, that's got to be dirty. But obviously, it's actually probably better than what Europeans were doing for their teeth.
It was definitely better for their teeth than what Europeans were doing at the time, for sure.
Huh.
Another theory suggests that teeth are visible in the human skeletal remains, and so it linked people to death by having these pearly whites. And therefore, they became taboo. So having black teeth just didn't produce an image of death or skeletal remains. And then lastly, there is a notion that the Japanese culture had, or frankly, actually has still, a preference for concealing public displays of feelings. The white makeup that they wore, complete with the plucking of eyebrows, and I do mean plucking completely, which is obviously very different from the Kardashian look we like today, it helped to create a mask-like appearance. In fact, even today, Japanese women tend to cover their mouths when they're smiling or laughing so that you don't see their teeth. And this is a trend that derives from these blackened teeth where they would have a mask-like facade so you couldn't really read their emotions. It's all very controlled, a lot like poetry.
There are rules.
There are rules.
And there you go.
Samurai also blacken their teeth, but likely they did it as a sign of loyalty because black was the color of loyalty. So when a samurai blackened their teeth, it reflected his decision to serve only one lord for the rest of his life.
Oh, that's really interesting, and I've never heard that.
No, I had not either
Also,
until I started.
No wonder I love black so much.
You're so loyal, Erica. So fancy, too. So now we have the historical context. Let's go over Murasaki's plot. The novel is divided into 3 parts. There's first Genji's rise and fall, which is mostly just about his love life.
Wait, he rises and falls in part 1?
Actually, he falls and rises.
Oh.
And it's not evenly divided. So the first part is chapters 1 through 33 out of 54 total. And these chapters are long, with a few exceptions. The second period is this transition period, and it's a very short segment that follows Genji's death. So Genji dies around chapter 33. And then finally are what are called the Uji chapters, and these are the final 9 chapters, and they focus on Genji's official and unofficial / secret descendants.
Oh my gosh.
So Erica, I would love if you could read the following synopsis that is most definitely abridged, but frankly, nobody reads the whole thing as written even today, so abridged is the way to go.
Genji is the son of Emperor Kiritsubo and a low-ranking concubine given no name because, why bother? She was probably a circa baby too.
I don't even think she got a circa.
So mom dies when he's just 3 years old and his father is devastated, unable to control his grief, and then one day, Emperor Kiritsubo hears of a woman, Lady Fujitsubo, a princess of the preceding emperor who greatly resembles his deceased and beloved concubine. Not creepy at all.
It gets worse.
Obviously. He marries her, and at first, Genji loves her as a stepmother. But later, because we love some weird incest and familial relations on this show, Genji and Lady Fujitsubo fall in love, and Genji is filled with frustration and rage that their love is forbidden. Additionally, Genji is on bad terms with his wife, Lady Aoi, and he has a series of love affairs, all that end badly. Either he's rejected, they die, or he just gets bored, because that's what you do when all you do is
write poetry about your love affairs. Eventually they'll get boring.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta be a good muse.
No pressure.
One day, Genji, while visiting a hill town north of Kyoto, happens upon a beautiful 10-year-old girl.
Just wait.
Oh no.
Just keep moving.
So he's fascinated by this child. All caps, child. This is super gross, Caroline. I don't like you right now.
This is like the epitome of Japanese literature.
Anyway.
I did not make this up, nor did I look for incest. It just finds me.
It does find you. It's like magnets. Anyway, soon he discovers she is the Lady Fujitsubo's niece. He kidnaps the girl called Murasaki, yes, like the author, and brings her up to his palace. He educates her and grooms her into his own womanly ideal to be just like Lady Fujitsubo.
Yeah, to recap here, he has kidnapped and groomed a 10-year-old girl to be just like his ideal woman, his stepmother, who was actually forced to marry his father because she looked so much like his mother.
That's just weird.
Keep going.
Okay. While grooming the girl, he is still sleeping with his stepmother, and together they have a son, Reize. But the lovers make a pact to keep his paternity a secret, so everyone just believes he's the son of Emperor Kiritsubo, Genji's father, and the boy is made a crown prince, which promotes Lady Fujitsubo to Empress. Meanwhile, Genji and his wife, Lady Aoi, reconcile. She gives birth to a son, but dies quickly thereafter, leaving Genji to find consolation in his groomed ward, Murasaki, whom he goes ahead and marries. Genji's dad, the emperor, dies, and he is succeeded by his first son, Suzaku, whose mother now becomes incredibly powerful at the court. It's now that Genji is kind of caught in this secret love affair with one of the new emperor's concubines. So yes, he is sleeping with his half-brother's concubine, which is, listen, not as bad as his dad's.
No, but he's sleeping with her too. They're sleeping with everybody.
Oh.
Sleeping, or lack thereof.
So, turns out, Emperor Suzaku secretly found the whole thing hilarious. But he's duty-bound to punish his half-brother. Genji is exiled to a rural town near Kobe, and there he meets a prosperous man, Akashi, who welcomes Genji and shows him kindness, which Genji repays by having an affair with the man's daughter. What a good guy.
Great guy.
She gives birth to Genji's only daughter, who will go on to become Empress, and I just am kind of getting the ick already, because what secret child?
There's so much ick.
Yeah.
Before we continue, and I will admit that when I was reading this, I was getting more heated by all of these incestuous situations and all of these love affair upon love affair upon love affair, like just pick one and settle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need a bit of a history lesson when it comes to sex in the Heian court.
Yeah, because wouldn't that just be like, I don't know, it would strike me as really uncalled for.
Is it scandalous?
Yeah, is it scandalous?
No.
Okay.
It is important to note that polyamory was very common in the Heian court. Husbands and wives kept separate households, with wives usually raising their children.
Well, some things never change.
Important men often took more than one wife. One emperor at some point had 9 official wives, as well as a number of concubines. One source I read said, and I thought this was so important to understand, quote, "A Heian woman's goal was to keep a man interested in her no matter how many nubile concubines he might retain, so that she would always be financially secure in a polygamous society. A man was often quite content to have at least one woman love him unconditionally in his lifetime. Whether she becomes first wife or second concubine made little difference to his emotional well-being." Unquote.
Yeah, because it's all about him.
Men and women were allowed varying amounts of sexual freedom, obviously limited by age, status, and gender. But virginity was not necessary for marriage, unlike the European courts of the time. Casual affairs were very common, though the very highest ranking women who anticipated a life as a first wife of a high-ranking man might choose to retain their virginity.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Polygamy with principal and secondary wives, official and unofficial concubines, long-lasting as well as short-lived affairs, all of these options, quote-unquote, were regularized into a wide variety of relationships. And it is within this system of so many choices that Genji conducts all of his love affairs. So I think this lessens our denunciation of his behavior. Like, I still don't like it. There's still a ton of ick. Grooming a young girl to be just like the young girl your father groomed to replace your own dead mother. I don't think there's any getting over that, but it is less weird than it feels to us now.
I agree. You can't get over that particular one. It is kind of nice, though, that the women aren't being ostracized and thrown out of the court for having these illicit affairs.
They were, however, kept very isolated.
Sure.
So women were within their own world, and so men could sneak in and they could have these affairs, but it's not like women had a very political or prominent place within the court, with the exception of poets. Interesting.
Yeah.
But back to the plot. Continue, Erica.
So while Genji is still in exile, sleeping with the kind man's daughter, Emperor Suzaku, back in Kyoto, is troubled by dreams of his late father, Emperor Kiritsubo. And at the same time, his mother, the power-hungry Dowager Empress, grows ill and her influence weakens. When the Emperor Suzaku's eyesight begins to fail, he decides to pardon Genji, who happily returns to court.
Da, 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 da.
There we learn that his secret son by Lady Fujitsubo is to become emperor after Suzaku abdicates. Reitse knows his true paternity and therefore promotes Genji to the highest possible rank.
He knows the paternity, but nobody else does,
Right.
but he still promotes Genji.
Which,
Yeah.
that's an uncle.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So after this, Genji, aged 40, so still pretty flippin' young, basically begins to decline. Wow, that's a young
He doesn't decline physically.
Oh, by the story.
His story declines, yeah.
Okay, so while he has a good political status, his love life diminishes. He marries another wife known as the Third Princess, but his nephew forces himself upon her. Oh, poor woman.
Mm-hmm.
And from that rape, Genji's wife bears a son, Kaoru. Legally, he's Genji's son, but in a lovely ironic little twist, he is really the son of Genji's nephew. Which is...
it's all coming back, isn't it?
It just really makes my head swim.
Yep.
But okay. Mm-hmm. At the same time, Murasaki, the wife he groomed for himself, asks to become a nun, which, like, same girl, same.
Yeah, she's tired. She's fulfilled her purpose, I guess.
Genji says no.
Obviously.
So then she dies, which forces Genji to contemplate how fleeting life is, and the following chapter is poetically titled, Vanished into the Clouds and Left Blank, which is, it's nice.
So poetic, right? Vanished into the clouds, and then it's just empty.
This forces the reader to feel Genji's contemplation of nothingness, and it also implies Genji's death. So the story picks back up with best friends Kaoru and Niao. Kaoru is Genji's legal but not biological son, while Niao is an imperial prince, son of Genji's daughter, the current empress, after Reize, Genji's secret son, abdicated the throne. So if you can keep up with...
I feel like we need some sort of a diagram.
There definitely needs to be a diagram. The two relations of Genji have many rivalries over the daughters of an imperial prince in Uji, a faraway place from the capital. And then the tale ends. Abruptly. Wait, it ends abruptly?
That's it. Bye.
So there's no conclusion?
No.
Did the author Murasaki die, or
no, she
just get bored?
She didn't die. There is some debate about the ending. One faction of scholars claims that it was finished, and this is what she intended it to do. Done. Others insist that there are later chapters that were lost to history, which is, of course, possible with the way that she continually came out with new things. And a third contingent suggests that Murasaki never actually planned this story, and she didn't really give it a structure. So while it is one of the world's first novels, it doesn't have the
candy shape.
Yeah, the shape. I never learned it as a candy.
That's how we learned it.
I did a hill.
Scene setting, and then build to conflict resolution, last little bit.
Yeah. So that doesn't really exist. Instead, she really did just write until she had nothing more to say, and then she stopped. No one exactly agrees, but probably it just ends. So because the tale was written episodically, the original, if it ever existed, is long gone. Instead, we have numerous copies, about 300, with lots of differences between them, and many are incomplete.
Ooh, fascinating.
When Murasaki released, quote unquote, a new installment, she basically wrote it, made a couple copies, and handed it out to her friends at court, who then in turn read them and then made their own copies to hand to their friends. And obviously, we can assume that they had mistakes or differences in the ones that they copied.
So like a game of telephone.
Exactly like telephone. With each copy, things were adjusted, things were changed. And excitingly, this is really cool, we are literally still finding manuscripts.
So it could not be over.
It could not be over. The latest one was discovered in just 2019. So there might be more chapters. We just never know.
This is amazing.
I know. I do hope there are more, because it does kind of... I am of the opinion that it ended pretty abruptly. Some historians don't believe that Lady Murasaki Shikibu was actually the author of the entire work. There are debates that have gone on for centuries, and frankly, nothing's going to be solved unless there's some sort of a major discovery made. But it is pretty well accepted that Murasaki wrote at least chapters 1 through 33, the Genji portion.
Which is not insignificant.
And it is the majority of the interesting aspects of court and things like that. Some literary historians argue that her daughter actually finished chapters 35 to 54. Particularly, chapter 44 is questioned by historians because it contains a lot of continuity mistakes. According to Royal Tyler's English translation of the novel, a recent computer analysis turned up statistically significant discrepancies of style between chapters 45 and 54. So we don't really know, but the style did significantly change. It is very possible.
That would be so neat
If the daughter
though,
continued.
if it was her daughter. But also think about it. Do you think you write the same way as you wrote
No,
10
not at all.
years ago?
And it was a long period of time. We do know that it was fully finished in the form that we have today by 1021, because we have a diary entry of a noblewoman describing her utter joy at finally acquiring the completed tale, which I just think is so amazing. It's like tweets
Yeah.
from the Heian court. We also know that the author, Lady Murasaki Shikibu, lived roughly, she is a circa baby, but she lived roughly from 973 to 1014, though other people have suggested she might have lived as late as 1025.
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody's getting the current form in 1021.
Yeah, so maybe they were late to the party, maybe they finally got the last few chapters because they hadn't had access, who knows. But we also know that Murasaki isn't actually her name. It's how she's referred to, likely in reference to the main character, Murasaki. Her real name is unknown, because in the Heian court, it was incredibly rude to call someone by their name.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. What the heck are you calling them?
Oh, great question. You would refer to them by their title, their honorific, the color that they were wearing, anything but their name. It's very confusing, and we're going to talk about it in a second, but there were no names in the list of more than 400 characters of this book. She never uses their names. The author, now known as Murasaki Shikibu, was born into the powerful Fujiwara clan, the ones who had conveniently married into the imperial family to ensure their blood ran through the emperor's veins.
Okay.
But while her great-grandfather had been at the tippity-top tier of the aristocracy, by her birth, her immediate family had fallen to the middle, maybe even lower ranks of the aristocracy.
Interesting.
So they were on the level of provincial governors. However, her immediate family did possess a reputation for literary prowess, which clearly she continued. Her great-grandfather and grandfather were well-known poets, and her father was a scholar of the Chinese classics and poetry. Unusually, she lived with her father's household because her mother had died when she was very young, she and a brother. And so we have a number of her own diary entries that describe her upbringing. Quote, "When my brother was a young boy learning the Chinese classics, I was in the habit of listening to him, and I became unusually proficient at understanding those passages that he found too difficult to understand and memorize."
Yeah, the hair
right?
flip.
You hear the hair flip as she says it. Father, a most learned man, was always regretting the fact. "Just my luck," he would say. "What a pity she was not born a man." Unquote.
God, some things never change.
Never change.
Yet again. This is the second time I've said that in this episode.
Might not be the last.
Oh, great.
With a father for a scholar and the unusual position of growing up in his household while he was educating her brother, she received a far more liberal education than what was usual for the time for a woman. Specifically, she became fluent in Chinese logographic kanji, or the language that the government used and was intended only for men.
Oh.
Women were thought to be incapable of higher intelligence and were therefore not usually educated in the Chinese kanji. When her father received a governorship in Echizen province, Murasaki again broke tradition by traveling with him. Women rarely traveled, and they definitely didn't go somewhere so remote and so far away. And she only returned 2 years later when it was time to be married.
Okay, and that's a pretty significant thing to do.
Her husband was her father's friend and a much older second cousin of the same branch of the Fujiwara clan. His name was Fujiwara no Nobutaka, so we do know his name.
Of course we do.
Another oddity, Murasaki was married in her late 20s, possibly even her early 30s, which felt weird to me, and then when I looked it up, very weird. Most girls married upon reaching puberty, so she was double the age of most brides. We don't know why she married so late, but we do know that she married a husband who already had multiple households with an unknown number of wives and children. She gave birth to a daughter shortly after their marriage, and then suddenly her much older husband died just 2 years after they were married.
Oh, darn.
It is believed that this is the time period that she began to write the Tale of Genji. She obviously always liked poetry, but this was her epic work, epic saga.
Nice.
In 1005, she was invited to serve as a lady-in-waiting to the Empress Shoshi by Fujiwara no Michinaga, the leader of the powerful Fujiwara clan that she was a minor part of. Empress Shoshi was his daughter, Fujiwara no Michinaga's daughter. and the future emperor was his grandson. This was a big step up for Murasaki. She was well educated, she'd gone with her dad, but she was not a lady in waiting to the empress. So what happened?
I'm gonna guess someone read her poetry.
Oh, actually, that's probably true, which is amazing to think it's based on her actual abilities.
I love that.
There is some belief that perhaps she and Fujiwara no Michinaga, leader of the Fujiwara clan, were lovers, because we do know that they exchanged poems after the death of her husband. But more likely, he felt that she was incredibly intelligent and well-educated for a woman and would like her to teach his daughter. She was about 16 at the time, so this is not like a tutor situation. It was more that she was a well-educated woman who could teach his daughter, the empress, Chinese. Against the custom of the day, but likely very useful for an empress to know since it was the language of the government, and it would certainly have helped her plotting father to kind of make sure he was in the know.
Oh, yes, so anything that was said, she could covertly
understand.
So
exactly.
Listen, our girl is like a spy.
A little bit. It's a little covert. Her diary says the following, quote, "Since last summer, very secretly, in odd moments, when there happened to be no one about, I have been reading with Her Majesty. There has, of course, been no question of formal lessons. I have thought it best to say nothing about the matter to anybody," unquote. She knew it was a secret. They knew it was a secret. Why she wrote it down, I don't know.
Never write it down.
But they wrote everything down.
But hey, thank you for writing it down for me.
Thank you so much. We super appreciate it.
But overall, don't write anything down.
Women of the court, especially the highest ranking women like the Empress, often held salons, very similar to like Vienna 19th century.
It's always been my dream in life to have a salon.
I kind of feel like the Pithy Chronicle is our salon.
Yeah, I could be about that.
We should have called it that. So they would have these salons that were kind of like their own little courts, and things got extremely competitive. When Shoshi, his daughter, was made empress, there actually already was an empress.
Is that
so
normal?
For the first time ever, no, there were two ruling empresses. Because Fujiwara was such a powerful clan, when her dad was like, oh no, my daughter will be an empress.
Will be an empress.
This happened. And they each had their own salon. So perhaps Daddy Fujiwara brought Murasaki to court to be a part of his daughter's rival salon. And if so, he did a pretty good job because she was really important. And she became highly praised for her literary abilities and, of course, gave Empress Shoshi's salon a stellar reputation.
Awesome.
However, Murasaki herself did not enjoy court life. And so when the Emperor Ichijo died and the Empress Shoshi retired to the lake region, so idyllic, Murasaki joined her, and she either died in 1014, the same year her brother died, or perhaps she died as late as 1025 if she led an uneventful and unremarkable life that never got written down. We just don't know.
Well, it's a highly flammable place.
It is.
You know?
Earthquakes, things happen. What we do know is that despite its lauded literary worth, the Tale of Genji is incredibly hard to read. Even native Japanese speakers could not pick up the unabridged novel and read it. They wouldn't even know where to start.
Why?
A few reasons. First, it's written in an archaic language that is now basically extinct. Kind of think like Old English. If you and I were to pick up...
Oh, yeah, we can't pick up Chaucer.
Well, or Gilgamesh. I think we're thinking even further back. Like, we could not make hide nor hair of it.
Okay.
Heian court period Japanese was highly inflected with a very complex grammatical system that is no longer in use. Secondly, as I said, almost none of the more than 400 characters in the novel are named in the work. Instead, due to the etiquette of the Heian court, they are referred to by their position at court or their relationship to others, which continually change throughout the lifetime of Genji in the novel.
Right.
So their position could change from chapter to chapter, and it's very difficult to figure out who was what, when, and where. They would be called something like the Minister of the Left, or His Excellency, or the Heir Apparent. And women, even worse, were frequently referred to solely by the color of their clothing.
Oh, of course.
Modern translations definitely help readers by giving characters nicknames. So for instance, the Lady Aoi, which is the quote-unquote name of Genji's first wife that eventually dies, she is only called that because the chapter in which she is introduced is titled Aoi. Otherwise, she's just Genji's wife. That's it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Third, the height of courtly fashion was to speak in poetic references. And therefore, much of the Tale of Genji is written as poetry, even in the conversations. And many, many phrases are references or slight rephrasings of classical poems that would add depth and meaning to the conversation that aren't given at all within the text.
So all of it is just this giant puzzle.
It's just a giant puzzle. And really, there weren't many translations up until the 19th and 20th century because it was so hard to figure out all the references that people just couldn't do it. And the first few English ones were just trash, like everybody says so. Any modern translation of this work has to keep all of these allusions in mind, and a lot of this unsaid information relies upon the reader picking up on these poetic references. Without that educational background, the complexity and the beauty of the story is lost. Today, Murasaki's work, originally written in kana, which is the Japanese phonetic script reserved for women and female audiences. It was considered the language of intimacy.
I do like that.
I thought that was so apropos. Today, it is only read in abridged versions by highly talented translators who were able to keep up with these complex ideas while still trying to remain true to the narrative and figure out who the hell was doing what, when, and where. But despite this archaic language, complex metaphorical poetic references, and a lack of names for hundreds of characters, the Tale of Genji remains the epitome of Japanese culture in the Heian period. It's an insider look behind the silk curtain depiction of a truly unique courtly culture. Lady Murasaki and the other women of the Heian court were instrumental in developing Japanese into a written language.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing.
It's so cool, because before that, it would have just been the government kanji based on the Chinese script. Her writings became required reading for court poets as early as the 12th century, so just 100 or so years after her death. By the 17th century, her work became emblematic of Confucian philosophy, and women were encouraged to read her books.
So not what Confucianism usually is about. Awesome.
No, but she does kind of show this notion of women are subservient to men.
Oh.
She was praised for her pen's sensitivity, her descriptions of emotions, and beginning in the 18th century, female virtue was tied to literacy, and Genji became symbolic of this.
Nice.
Boxes, screens, scrolls with images of Genji or scenes from the novel were given as wedding gifts to represent marital success. Ironic considering her own marriage to an old guy only lasted 2 years.
And that Genji was having a ton of affairs.
Yeah, and was not at all in love with his own wives. The Tale of Genji has become many things to many different audiences throughout many different media over 1,000 years. Its influence and importance is unmatched by any other Japanese text or artifact. And it all started with a woman who listened at the door to her brother's lessons. A woman who wrote for other women who described their lives so beautifully that it still entrances readers today.
And that, my friends, is that. I'm Erica.
And I'm Caroline, and we are Pithily Yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!